news site trusted, shopping site and unknown video site, VO it's called. Basically, almost no one's heard of it.
Okay. So.
Just give me like your elevator pitch.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the Usable Privacy Policies project, and in this project we're working in an interdisciplinary team to look at how we can extract features from privacy policies. So previous approaches of improving notice and choice have lacked industry support, so our approach in this project is to directly extract relevant information and data practices from the privacy policy text by using a combination of crowdsourcing and natural language processing. And this information can then be used to conduct privacy policy analysis, as well as create new, for example, browser plugins with which we can inform users about the issues on the websites and the data practices. As part of this project, we developed a privacy policy annotation tool for crowdsourcing the annotation of privacy policies, and we have developed an interface which shows the privacy policy and then asks a couple of questions about these policies, and we're experimenting with different ways of improving these tasks, and in order to see what kind of accuracy we can get by crowdsourcing this kind of annotation to general crowd workers compared to experts.
Hi, I'm Morgan from Lookout Mobile Security, and we developed a short-form privacy policy that was visual for use on our website and our mobile application. Based on the NTA's guidelines, we then rebranded it Lookout Style and user tested it. As you can see in the middle here, we tested two different versions, one with visible null states and one where they were removed, and got user feedback and understanding of their comprehension of this model, and then came up with a hybrid version, finally, that has greatly increased user comprehension of our basic short-form privacy policy, what we collect, and who do we share with.
So the problem that we're trying to solve here is that privacy settings in today's systems are often very difficult for users to understand or to use. And they're also limited in terms of what they can do, what the settings can do. But if you use, for example, completely natural language, people can say a lot, it can be very flexible, but then the systems cannot use that as easily. And so the middle-of-the-ground approach that we came up with here, for example, is to use filters. And filters are familiar to people as something that they use for filtering their incoming email, for instance. And so the idea here that we're trying is, can we use those same kinds of interfaces, but instead of filtering incoming information, apply that to outgoing information so that you can use it to manage privacy of your outgoing information. So for example, by having some interface like this, you can create a whole bunch of rules with various conditions quite easily to manage your information. So in this particular case, if it's my friends asking, and if I'm not at work, and it's not during 9 to 5 on a weekday, then I'm permitting my friends to see my location, right? And these are the kinds of things that are not very easy to achieve currently with current interfaces. And with this technique, the goal or the hope is that people can be more expressive and more flexible without needing to know a lot about the underlying details of how the structuring takes place by the system. And then the other additional benefits could be, for example, when you have a rule set like this, it can grow in context. So just, when you find somebody who wants to access location now, you can kind of just make a rule on the spot. You can also share it with other people. So I oftentimes get asked by friends and family to what the best settings are, and I could kind of just say, here are some 5 or 6 rules that I can just share, and you can just apply those to your context. So currently this is in a demo stage, and the way we want to proceed with this is to now do some user evaluations to look at how useful people actually find it and to what extent they are successful in leveraging this approach.
Today, there are so many online services that collect a lot of data about users. This data could be coming from either when you visit a website or when you go to a social networking site or offline purchases that you make at Target or Walmart. And all this data is being combined and profiles are being created about individual users like you and me, right? So now there are many benefits of this. For example, you get many free services like Google Search or even Facebook. However, there are also privacy concerns. Like what's being done with this data? What's happening to that data? How is it being used, right? So what we did in our work is we looked at these actual profiles that are being created about users. For example, there are some companies that do give you access to the profiles they have built about you, and we asked users to look at those profiles. And what we found is very interesting. So by looking at actual profiles, we documented what kind of data is being actually collected, what's out there about users, and also what concerns do users have about this data in their own profiles. We give some examples of data types here. You can see that, okay, they have your gender, your marital status, what's your age, how much did you study, what's your income range, do you have kids, do you vote, what kind of religious values do you hold, what kind of medications. We found over the counter, but still it's sensitive to some users. They claim, these aggregators claim that they have information about depression, diabetes. We didn't find it right away, but we may find it later. Are you likely to buy American? There's this credit card interest score. There's, many other things that are out there. About user concerns, people think some of this data at least is sensitive. And a bigger concern was that, okay, if Rite Aid knows about what I do at Rite Aid, it's okay. If Walmart knows what I do at Walmart, it's okay. But combining these two things and putting it in a single location, that's not acceptable. Then the other interesting thing we found is that there are a lot of inaccuracies in these profiles. Some of these profiles are about 80% inaccurate. So we know that this data is being used to make decisions about users, right? For example, identity verification. If 80% of this data is inaccurate and something adverse comes out of it, who's responsible? Like, who's in charge of this? Who's accountable? Because there are so many people involved and data is coming from so many sources. So where was the error introduced? Like, who's supposed to correct it? So those are some of the things we think are important, and we need to investigate that further.
In our this, okay, you can edit this so I'm going on. Okay. In our survey, we asked approximately 500 respondents for each part, the knowledge and the opinion. And our focus was on what people know, what people do, and what people want with regard to privacy. As many other researchers have discussed, including today, most people don't read the privacy policies in terms of service. But we also, one of the questions in our survey asked if you had ever decided to not use a website strictly because of the privacy policy or terms of service agreement. And even if you had, I think it was about 88% of people who rarely or never read them, but 43% that said that at least once they had their decision about whether to use a particular service or website was changed. So these are the sorts of this sort of saliency and relevance aspect that is particularly interesting when considering what people want and how to make consumers more comfortable. So one of our big conclusions in that regard was that people do want more options. That if you gave them more options, that it would be a better marketplaces.
We have research here on a privacy policy analysis tool, which I like to demonstrate to you. This is a regular natural language privacy policy. And if you click here on the right-hand corner of the screen on our Privy extension, it will do a machine learning analysis of this privacy policy. And as you can see, this privacy policy has a total grade of B. And below the grade, there are 6 different analysis results from which the user can get information how this particular website collects, discloses, and uses information.
Our group is looking at developing technologies that would help people avoid posting regrettable posts. And we focused on Twitter in particular. So we looked at deleted tweets as potentially regrettable posts. So we followed about 300,000 people and captured their deleted tweets for 1 week. And we looked at several dimensions of the tweets that they deleted. 2 interesting observations we found on those deleted tweets. One is deleted tweets contain more negative sentiments than undeleted tweets, or the tweets that people do not delete. And also we found that people delete posts that have location that point to their homes, as homes are very private places. In future work, we are trying to focus on a smaller number of people to analyze in depth reasons for deleting tweets.
Okay, yeah. Hi, so I wanted to share the work that the Open Notice Initiative is doing. It's in tiny little lettering up here. We are working on a consent receipt standard. And so the cartoon here represents what happens typically when you go to a store and you get a transaction receipt. Somehow we missed that online. We didn't do that, even though writing was actually invented for the very first piece of writing, which was a transaction receipt. So We are following this model. What's down here is actually the effect of the receipt. It might be a control panel or a dashboard for you to control your consent receipts once you've got them. But the model is basically this. We expect this area, this is things that you would see before you give consent, your preferences, privacy icons that might help you decide whether to give consent, and the company policy and TOU, which no one ever reads. This is what you see before, and partners will work on these things. What we're interested in is the standard for the consent receipt or the transaction receipt and the effects that it would create after. Once you have that memorialization of your consent, then, a copy goes to the company and a copy to you. But also we could tweet out, such and such company honored my do not track request. Or I could email the company and say, hey, thanks for honoring that request. Or you didn't acknowledge, and the jurisdiction in my location jurisdiction actually asks that you respond, and you didn't. So maybe that's the email. There could also be a clearinghouse, a public website that shows a compilation of the activity, which would allow regulators who right now have no insight into consents and what happens with notice and consent on a daily basis on a practical level. We could create an email report for them, but also give a public report on a website for the press, regulators, and the public to be able to then act around what's happening with notice and consent. So we think that this machine-readable, human-readable, and legal-readable consent receipt standard that we're building will allow these good effects to happen and the dashboard to happen. You could withdraw consent and, adjust your preferences. We think that those effects, the values will be very high, increased usability and better compatibility, but also the insight that regulators would get and the businesses who would then be able to distinguish themselves for being good about privacy. We think we want to reward those folks. So this is what we're building, and we're working on partnering with other folks. We don't want to build it all, and that's it. So that's the consent receipt.